there has to be a couple things that happen with creative financing 100% of the time. And you have to have one, a motivated seller. You have to have someone who really wants to sell their business. And then two, there has to be a lot of trust built up, because a lot of the creative financing we'll talk about in some of these examples is delayed payments for the seller. They might make more money on the sale of the business, but they're going to be delayed. And so any delayed payment for a seller is risky because they may not get that payment down the road. And so that's where I think these two things are very critical, is a lot of trust with the seller. And then also the seller has to be motivated to sell. Let me talk about one actually that I thought was super interesting. And I just heard about this business last night when I was talking to a buddy. So he had a boat rental business on the East Coast where they, you could pay a subscription. I don't know what it was, maybe 100 or 200 bucks a month. And you just had access to all these like sick boats, fishing boats, wakeboarding boats, whatever. Right. This was an amazing business that he built up over the years, multiple seven figures in revenue, just doing great. But he actually ended up buying a different business. He bought a, Main Street traditional service business out in the Midwest and move it out there. He wanted to exit his boat business because he wasn't living on the East Coast anymore. And there's a couple things that you can do, right? You can go the traditional path. You just sell it. He wasn't quite ready to sell it, but then somebody in his network just approached him and said, "Hey, can I buy this business from you?" And so they went the traditional path of like, what does an SBA loan look like? We have to get this external valuation firm and all this red tape. And then they basically went back to the table and said, well, what works for the seller and what works for the buyer? And the seller, he was more interested in passive income, and the seller didn't want to sign a personal guarantee for some massive amount. So what they actually did was a 15-year seller note, almost 100% seller finance. And what a seller financed note means is the seller of the business is actually financing it. So, you're actually paying the seller back over time. And it could be 1 year, 2 years, 10 years. In this case, it was 15 years at a nominal interest rate. And that was actually the goal of the seller and the goal of the buyer. So the buyer now has this several $1 million business that they took over. They're going to be paying off this note, and it's not going to take all their cash flow. They still have enough money to build the business, still have enough money to pay themselves. But the seller was able to get a 60% higher price than what was normal for that business.